March 23, 1945. Mid-morning. A headquarters tent somewhere west of the Rhine. General Omar Bradley, commander of the entire American 12th Army Group, responsible for over 1 million men, was going through the morning's reports when a call came through from Third Army. On the line was George Patton, and what he was about to say never made it into the official war diary the way it actually happened. 7 words changed the tone of the whole conversation, and they revealed more about command, ego, and the strange brotherhood of generals than 1,000 pages of military history. Because the call wasn't a request for orders, and it wasn't a routine update. It was a notification, past tense, informing Bradley that one of his Army commanders, George Patton, naturally, had already done something extraordinary, something dangerous, something that got ahead of the operational plan everyone thought was still days away. Patton's Third Army had crossed the Rhine, not next week as the timetable implied, not with the massive airborne assault and artillery preparation Montgomery was orchestrating 200 miles north. Patton had crossed the previous night in darkness with assault boats and almost no fanfare, and he'd waited until morning before bothering to mention it, and even then, he asked Bradley to keep it quiet. "Brad, don't tell anyone, but I'm across," Patton said. Bradley, by his own later account, was caught off guard. "Well, I'll be damned," he replied. "You mean across the Rhine?" "Sure am," Patton said. "I sneaked a division over last night. But there are so few Krauts around there, they don't know it yet, so don't make any announcement. We'll keep it a secret until we see how it goes." That exchange, recorded in Bradley's own post-war account, is the real version of the moment, and it's stranger than any invented scene could be. Because embedded in that casual, almost offhand phone call was a calculated provocation, a deliberate needle aimed at Montgomery, and a question that went unasked but hung in the air. "What are you going to do about it, Brad?" Bradley's response wasn't anger, and it wasn't real surprise. Not by the time the call came in. Rumors of the crossing had already reached his headquarters informally, through the network every army develops, staff officers talking to staff officers. What Bradley did next, and what he chose not to do, would determine whether Patton's unauthorized dash across the Rhine became a triumph or a court-martial offense. But here's what makes this moment genuinely fascinating. Here's why it matters, beyond military procedure or command protocol. Because this wasn't just about 2 generals. This was about 2 fundamentally opposed philosophies of warfare, colliding at the exact moment when the war was nearly won, when the stakes should have been lowest, when cooperation should have been easiest. Instead, it became personal. So, what exactly did Patton do that night? Why cross the Rhine without authorization, without air support, without even waking his commanding officer? And what did Bradley actually do about it? Not the sanitized version that appeared in memoirs, but what the record actually shows. Because the truth is messier than the legend, and far more interesting. The race no one admitted was happening. To understand why Patton's Rhine crossing mattered, you need to understand what the Rhine meant in March 1945. Not just a river, a psychological barrier. The last natural defensive line protecting Germany's industrial heartland. In German military mythology, the Rhine was sacred. The border, the legions of Rome never permanently breached. Hitler had staked his final defensive strategy on holding it. Once the Allies crossed the Rhine in force, the war was effectively over. Everyone knew it, which meant everyone wanted to be first. Montgomery had been planning his Rhine crossing, Operation Plunder, since February. It was massive. 2 armies, an enormous airborne drop, thousands of artillery pieces, elaborate smoke screens, and enough logistical preparation to invade a continent. The date was set for the night of March 23rd. Churchill was coming to watch. The press was invited. It was going to be the triumph Montgomery believed he'd earned, after being denied the single thrust into Germany he'd argued for since Normandy. Patton despised it. Not the operation itself, but what it represented. The cautious, methodical, overwhelming force approach that contradicted everything Patton believed about mobile warfare. He'd been racing across France and Germany for 9 months, moving faster than supply lines could follow, proving that audacity mattered more than preparation. And now, with the Rhine in front of him, he had no intention of waiting around to play a supporting role in someone else's set-piece battle. So Patton decided to cross first, not as part of anyone's plan, but as a rejection of it. The opportunity came at Oppenheim, a small town on the Rhine between Mainz and Worms. Third Army intelligence had identified weak German defenses there. Understrength units, minimal fortifications, no significant armor. On the night of March 22nd, while Montgomery's guns were still moving into position 200 miles north, Patton's 5th Infantry Division began ferrying across the Rhine in assault boats. No preliminary bombardment, no air support, just infantry, darkness, and speed. Contemporary press reports described the crossing as achieved with barely any resistance, and only light casualties. The Germans had been watching for the American push farther north, in step with Montgomery's offensive, and Patton's crossing caught them looking the wrong way. By dawn, there was a division on the eastern bank. By the next day, engineers had pontoon bridges up and tanks rolling across. That evening, Patton fired off a message to Eisenhower's headquarters that has become one of the most quoted lines to come out of the European theater. "Dear Schaeff, I have just pissed into the Rhine River. For God's sake, send some gasoline." Whether Patton composed it exactly that way, or it was polished afterward, it captures the essential cruelty of the whole gesture. He was demonstrating that he could achieve in one night, with one division and no fanfare, something Montgomery needed 2 armies and 2 weeks of preparation to accomplish. On March 23rd, Eisenhower sent Patton a warm letter praising the achievements of Third Army over the previous 9 months. Official, restrained, and utterly overshadowed by what everyone already knew Patton had done. What Bradley actually did. The official record here is thin, and the popular retellings have filled the gap with dialogue that can't be verified. Dramatic tent scenes, staff officers logging exact phrases, generals trading barbed lines pulled from diaries that don't actually say what people claim they say. What we can say with confidence is this. Bradley's own post-war account describes learning of the crossing by phone, being asked to keep it quiet, and playing along. His memoirs, published in 1951, describe his reaction as pleased and framed Patton's initiative as exactly the kind of tactical flexibility Third Army was built for. That framing was, at minimum, convenient. It let Bradley claim the crossing as something he'd expected and enabled, rather than something sprung on him without warning. Because that was the real issue underneath the humor of the phone call. Not whether the crossing was tactically sound, it clearly was, and not whether Patton had the authority. Operational orders gave Army commanders real discretion to exploit opportunities. The real issue was whether Patton's need to be first, and to make sure everyone knew it, would create friction with Eisenhower, with Montgomery, and with the carefully balanced Allied command structure Bradley spent every day trying to hold together. Bradley didn't publicly criticize Patton. He didn't need to. Within hours, congratulatory messages were arriving from Eisenhower's headquarters and beyond, praising the bold decision to exploit German weakness ahead of schedule. Bradley didn't correct the record to say he'd been informed only after the fact. He accepted the credit, and in doing so, he folded Patton's unauthorized dash into the story of his own command judgment. The Rhine crossing made Patton famous. The newspapers loved it. While Montgomery staged his enormous, carefully choreographed assault, the cowboy general had slipped across in the dark and beaten everyone to the punch. It confirmed everything the American public wanted to believe about their military. That individual initiative mattered more than bureaucratic planning. That audacity beat caution. That one bold general could change the shape of a campaign. Bradley got a footnote. The commanding officer whose army group had actually executed the operation, proper, professional, and largely forgotten, next to Patton's headline. And that, maybe, is the part of this story that actually matters. Not a script of tent-side dialogue that never happened, but what Bradley did with the situation he was handed. That command isn't only about controlling brilliant, difficult subordinates. Sometimes, it's about deciding which battles over ego are worth having, and which ones you let go, because winning the war matters more. That you can let someone else take the headline as long as the mission succeeds. Patton crossed the Rhine because he needed to prove something, to Montgomery, to the press, to himself. Bradley let the story stand because he understood that Patton's ego, pointed in the right direction, was a weapon. Dangerous, unpredictable, but effective. The relationship between the two men was never entirely easy. Bradley would later have real reservations about recommending Patton for higher command, and would describe him privately as brilliant, but exhausting to manage. But he never publicly second-guessed the Rhine crossing, never suggested it was anything other than good, aggressive soldiering, because that's what the moment required. And Bradley, for all his blandness, understood the demands of command in ways that went beyond any single decision. The war in Europe ended about 7 weeks later. Patton died in a car accident in December 1945. Bradley lived another 36 years, wrote his memoirs, served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and left behind an account of that Rhine crossing that was more diplomatic than dramatic. Sometimes the most important command decisions are the ones a general chooses not to make. Here at World War File 01, we uncover the moments that reveal how wars are really fought, not just on battlefields, but in headquarters tents, over telephone lines, in the space between ego and duty. Subscribe to explore the stories behind the battles you thought you knew.